When people hear the name Queen Victoria, they often imagine a dignified queen dressed in black, a loving wife mourning her husband, and the ruler who presided over one of the greatest empires in history. History books frequently describe her reign as an age of progress, industrial innovation, scientific discovery, and expanding civilization. Under her rule, Britain became the world's most powerful empire, controlling nearly a quarter of the Earth's land and population. To millions, Victoria remains a symbol of stability, tradition, and royal prestige. But there is another side to the story. Behind the magnificent palaces, glittering royal ceremonies, and triumphant portraits, lay an empire built on conquest, exploitation, and immense human suffering. While the Victorian era transformed Britain into a global superpower, many historians argue that millions of people across Asia, Africa, and other parts of the world paid a terrible price for that success. This is the story that often receives no attention. The phrase, "the sun never sets on the British Empire," was once a source of national pride. British leaders celebrated the empire as a force for civilization, education, and colonization. Clearly, ports expanded, and new systems of administration were introduced across colonies. However, critics argue that these developments were rarely acts of pure generosity. Instead, many of them primarily served Britain's economic and strategic interests. Railways transported raw materials to ports, roads enabled military support. Colonial administrations paid taxes and protected British commercial power. The wealth flowing into Britain during Queen Victoria's reign was extraordinary. Cotton from India, tea from Asia, gold and diamonds from Africa, and countless other valuable resources enriched British industries and strengthened London's financial dominance. Grand buildings, museums, and institutions flourished across Britain, showcasing the prosperity of the empire. Yet behind that prosperity stood millions of colonial workers who labored under difficult conditions, often receiving little benefit from the wealth they helped create. One of the most controversial questions surrounding Queen Victoria's reign is this: how much responsibility did the queen herself bear for the actions of the empire? Some historians argue that Victoria was largely constitutional, whose political powers were limited. Decisions about wars, taxation, and colonial governance were mainly made by Parliament and the Prime Minister. Others counter that although her direct authority had limits, Victoria consistently supported imperial expansion and became its most recognizable symbol. Her speeches, correspondence, and public image helped legitimize Britain's growing global ambitions. The turning point came in 1857, when one of the most significant uprisings against British rule erupted in India. Known by different names, including the Indian Rebellion, the Sepoy Mutiny, or the First War of Independence, depending on historical perspective, the conflict shocked the British government. What began as unrest among Indian soldiers rapidly spread across northern India, involving civilians, local rulers, and communities frustrated by years of political interference, economic hardship, and cultural tensions. The rebellion was eventually crushed after months of brutal fighting. Both sides committed acts of violence, and the conflict left deep scars that remain part of historical debate today. In Britain, the uprising reinforced fears that stronger imperial control was necessary. In India, it became a lasting symbol of resistance against colonial rule. The aftermath changed history forever. In 1858, control of India passed from the East India Company directly to the British Crown. Queen Victoria issued a royal proclamation promising fairness, religious tolerance, and equal protection under the law. To many people at the time, these promises appeared hopeful. Yet critics argue that despite these assurances, colonial rule continued to prioritize British interests over the aspirations of millions of Indians. Then, in 1876, Queen Victoria received a new title that carried enormous symbolic importance: Empress of India. The title reinforced Britain's authority over one of the world's richest and most populous regions. Lavish imperial ceremonies celebrated the empire's glory, while newspapers praised Britain's civilizing mission. Across the empire, growing numbers of intellectuals, journalists, and local leaders questioned whether colonial rule truly benefited ordinary people. They pointed to unequal economic policies, restricted political freedoms, and systems that often favored British officials over local populations.
These criticisms would later inspire powerful independence movements across many colonies.
Another aspect that makes Queen Victoria's legacy controversial is the stark contrast between Britain's domestic values and its colonial practices. Victorian Britain often promoted ideals such as morality, justice, Christian virtue, and the rule of law. Yet critics argue that these principles were not always applied equally throughout the empire. In many colonies, racial hierarchies influenced governance, economic opportunity, and legal treatment, creating inequalities that would leave lasting consequences long after colonial rule ended. Even today, historians continue debating Queen Victoria's personal responsibility. Was she simply a ceremonial monarch representing decisions made by elected governments? Or was she an influential figure whose support gave moral legitimacy to imperial expansion? The answer is far more complex than either extreme. Understanding Queen Victoria requires looking beyond romantic portraits and royal legends. It means examining both the remarkable achievements of the Victorian age and the profound human costs experienced across the empire. History is rarely divided into heroes and villains. Instead, it is often shaped by powerful individuals, political systems, and difficult choices whose consequences continue to influence the modern world. The rebellion quickly escalated into one of the largest challenges the British Empire had ever faced. Fierce battles erupted across northern India, with both British and Indian forces suffering heavy casualties. Entire towns became battlefields, and innocent civilians were caught in the violence. Historians agree that atrocities were committed by both sides, making the conflict one of the darkest chapters in 19th century colonial history. After months of fighting, British forces regained control through overwhelming military strength. The consequences were severe. Thousands of suspected rebels were executed, villages were destroyed, and many local rulers lost their authority. The British government concluded that the East India Company had failed to govern effectively, leading to a historic political change. As the years passed, Britain expanded its influence even further. The empire stretched across Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and the Pacific. Supporters argued that British rule brought railways, modern education, legal institutions, and improved communication networks. Critics, however, maintain that these projects were often designed primarily to strengthen imperial control, transport valuable resources, and expand British trade rather than improve the lives of local populations. Economic policies during the Victorian era remain among the most debated aspects of Britain's imperial legacy. Colonies supplied raw materials at low prices, while purchasing manufactured goods from British factories. This arrangement helped fuel Britain's industrial revolution, but many scholars argue that it also limited industrial development within the colonies themselves. Local craftsmen and traditional industries often struggled to compete with imported British products, contributing to long-term economic dependence. The issue of famine has also become central to discussions about Queen Victoria's reign. Several devastating famines occurred in British-ruled India during the 19th century, resulting in the deaths of millions of people. Historians continue to debate the extent to which colonial economic policies, taxation, grain exports, and government responses worsened these disasters. Some argue that natural causes were the primary factor, while others believe that administrative decisions significantly increased human suffering. This remains one of the most sensitive and widely discussed topics in the history of the British Empire. By the late 19th century, Queen Victoria had become more than a monarch. She had become the face of an empire that reached nearly every corner of the globe. Admirers celebrated her as a symbol of unity and progress, while critics viewed her reign as representing a system that concentrated wealth and power in Britain at the expense of millions living under colonial rule. These sharply different interpretations continue to shape debates among historians today. As new evidence, personal letters, official records, and colonial accounts have been studied over the years, the image of Queen Victoria has become increasingly complex. Rather than fitting neatly into the role of either a heroic ruler or a ruthless imperial figure, she remains one of history's most debated monarchs. Understanding her legacy requires examining both the remarkable achievements of the Victorian age and the lasting consequences of imperial expansion across the world. So, was Queen Victoria a visionary monarch who guided Britain into an age of unprecedented progress? Or was she the symbolic face of an empire that expanded through conquest, economic exploitation, and colonial domination? The answer continues to divide historians even today.
Her reign undeniably transformed the modern world, but it also left behind painful memories that are still remembered across many former colonies. The true legacy of Queen Victoria cannot be understood by celebrating only the achievements or focusing solely on the controversies. It lies somewhere between both. History is rarely black and white, and the Victorian era is one of its clearest examples. As more historical documents are uncovered and different perspectives are explored, the debate over Queen Victoria's legacy continues to evolve. Perhaps the greatest lesson is that every empire writes its own story, but only time reveals the voices that were once ignored. The question is no longer what the empire claimed to be, but what history ultimately remembers it for.